He was famously called the former white supremacist-in-chief by Democrat Congresswoman Cori Bush in 2021. Back in 2018, Hillary Clinton called former U.S. President Donald Trump ignorant and racist after he reportedly made highly derogatory comments about Haiti and African countries. Even Republican Nikki Haley, who recently dropped out of the race for the presidential nomination, called recent comments Trump made about African Americans disgusting. In 2016, Trump received 8% of the black vote according to the exit polls, the highest level of support by black voters for any Republican since George Bush in 2000. By the 2020 U.S. presidential election, support for Trump among black voters had surged to 12%. And, while current opinion polls vary, a recent survey from Gen Forward shows that if the elections were held today, 17% of black voters would vote for Donald Trump while 20% said they would vote for someone other than Trump or Biden. The black voting bloc is unique in the U.S. Currently, it is the only group of voters which has consistently identified with the Democrat Party, reaching 77% of black voters in favor of Democrats in 2020. By comparison, 42% of white voters and 63% of Latino voters identify as Democrats. Now, however, only 63% of black voters, an all-time low since Gen Forward started collecting data in 1999, say they will support Biden this year, according to the survey. These numbers could spell trouble for Democrats in November's presidential election, especially in swing states. To understand the history of the black vote and the Republican Party, it is necessary to look back at voting patterns in the early 20th century. Before the 1930s, the Republican and Democratic parties received roughly equal support from both black and white voters. The election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, however, triggered a shift of black voters to the Democratic Party. According to data from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, Roosevelt gained 71% of the black vote for his presidency in 1936. During the Great Depression, African Americans were disproportionately impacted by unemployment. Roosevelt's New Deal, a set of economic recovery programs, attempted to correct these economic issues, and Roosevelt would later say, among American citizens, there should be no forgotten men and no forgotten races. The Democrats would continue peeling away voters from the Republican Party in the late 1940s when Harry S. Truman, another Democratic president, signed an executive order on July 26, 1948, ordering the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces. This infuriated a cohort of the Democratic Party, known as the Dixiecrats, however, who were opposed to civil rights legislation and wanted to keep segregation in force in the southern states. The Dixiecrats held a separate convention in Birmingham, Alabama in July 1948, at which they nominated South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond, a staunch segregationist, for president on what they termed the states' rights ticket, which called for the right to keep segregation. Although Thurmond won more than 1.1 million popular votes in the 1948 presidential election, this amounted to only 2.4% of votes cast, and he was ultimately defeated by Truman, who won 303 electoral votes against Thurmond's 39. Thomas Dewey, the Republican candidate, took 189. The Democrats would further capture the black vote in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 under Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson. After signing the civil rights legislation into law, Johnson foresaw the backlash from the white Southern voting bloc when he famously said, "We've lost the South for a generation." Furthering the divide between the black and white voting blocs, Richard Nixon, a Republican, deployed what was known at the time as the Southern Strategy during his presidential bids in 1968 and 1972. The strategy was designed to appeal to white voters in the South who were disenchanted with the Democratic Party's stance on civil rights and racial integration. A Gallup poll last year showed that the proportion of black adults in the U.S. who consider themselves Democrats had decreased from 77% in 2020 to 66%. Today's black voters operate a bit more independently from previous generations, especially young black voters. In the 2022 midterm elections, Biden largely retained the black vote. However, there was a considerable shift among black voters towards the Republican Party, from 8% at the midterms 4 years previously to 14% in 2022. Historically, the Democratic Party's legacy with the civil rights movement is what kept it popular with black voters. However, younger black voters do not have those same civil rights legacy attachments. I think a certain generation of black voters don't have the direct experience with the civil rights movement or the knowledge of those things, because to them that's not memory, it's history, said Adolphus Belt, political scientist at Winthrop University. They're coming in without an understanding of these historical contours and turns, limitations, opportunities. And those frustrations are being made clear in this rising percentage of black voters that's taking a different look at the Republican Party in general, and are exploring some curiosities with Trump, despite his racial baggage. Furthermore, black voters are frustrated that they are receiving little from the Democratic Party in return for what they feel is long-term, steadfast support, he said. White voters in general, white male voters most especially, are the greatest constituency that the Republican Party has, and they tend to be treated well by the Republican Party. You don't see that same sort of consistent celebration, respect for and rewarding of black voters and black women voters by the Democratic Party.